This week on Poll Hub, America has embarked on an unprecedented mid-decade redistricting palooza aimed at removing as many seats as possible from the opposition party in state after state. And with the recent Supreme Court action essentially ending the Voting Rights Act, that has also brought something even more radical. The act of stopping elections while voting is underway in order to redistrict black legislators out of their seats. Maybe surprisingly, most Americans don't support this redistricting in principle. That's the key phrase, however, and we're going to discuss. Then, do you buy scratch-offs, lotto tickets, only play Mega Millions when it reaches $1 billion? That's me. Americans seem to love their lotteries, but is this a good thing for the country? We're digging in. Finally, we head into the long weekend that unofficially starts the summer season. And so our fun fact is about summer vacation. And it's a weird set of answers. Too bad Barb's not here because she would definitely take a look at these answers and say, what were they thinking? Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Depp.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
Lee, you're back from Los Angeles, but Barb is not here, so we're back to a trio again. How was LA? Good conference.
LA was very interesting. As you know, two of our super students presented a paper, and they were the only undergraduates presenting a paper, and they were probably better than most of the people who'd been there before and presented papers. They were just awesome. So shout out to Ellie and to Abel for their terrific presentation on network science. It was really an awesome presentation. I was really blown away.
That's good. And you got your star on the Walk of Fame, I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, I left it at the airport, and so I called, and they said you can have your baggage or your walk of. I went for baggage. It was a bad move.
So we do have a more serious topic though to get to here, and that is the redistricting that's been going on. Just so everybody's on the same page, redistricting typically happens after the census. The census happens every 10 years. The reason for redistricting is because populations change. So a state grows, you get a congressional seat. A state loses population like New York has been, and we lose congressional seats. That's kind of the reason for redistricting. There's always been some partisan angling on this. That's where the gerrymandering term comes from. That's from way back in the 1800s when it was done to ensure that certain people or certain parties won certain seats. So that's generally what's happened. This is different. This mid-decade redistricting has happened. Both parties are involved in it to try and eliminate seats of the party that's not in charge, in power in that state. So in the case of California, they have worked to eliminate Republican House seats. In Republican states, they have worked to, and may succeed, we'll see on Election Day, to eliminate Democratic House seats. This is all, again, unprecedented, and Americans, in principle, don't like this. There's a poll from just last month, April 2026, The Economist YouGov, a broad opposition to this type of partisan gerrymandering. 71% of Americans say states should not be allowed to draw congressional districts to intentionally favor one political party. And that is, just to be clear, that is exactly what is happening in states. Both Democrats and Republicans have been taking advantage of this. 7%, only 7% in this poll say partisan gerrymandering should be allowed. And the opposition, again, this is like last week where we had the rare bit of bipartisanship, 74% of Democrats, 70% of independents, and 69% of Republicans oppose it. There's an NBC poll from 2025. Overwhelming support was shown for removing politicians from the process of redistricting. 82% of Americans said there should be independent commissions rather than politicians to draw congressional district maps. Again, this support cuts across party lines. Redistricting reform is one of these rare 80-20 issues in politics where about 80% of the people agree, 20% disagree. There is, however, a twist on this. And this is what I alluded to. And Lee, I think you're going to get this one right away. It really depends on who you ask and whether you're asking this in a way that is aligned with the party. So for instance, in a 2025 political survey, 54% of Democrats support redrawing maps to gain advantage over Republicans. 52% of Republicans support gerrymandering to beat Democrats. And when given the options of how maps should be drawn, 38% in that poll do prefer an independent, politically neutral process. 34% say legislatures should draw the map, but with a voter approval. 7% say legislatures should draw maps without voter approval, and 21% are unsure. So when it comes to, yeah, but in this case, for me and my party, I actually think it's a good idea, this seems to be what the case is here. So two things. One, is this as precedented as I'm making it historically, the mid-decade redistricting? I know gerrymandering isn't. And two, what's your take on Americans having, yes, I'm absolutely opposed to this, except.
Yeah, well, I think it's the old, I guess all adages are old, but this one has been so worn, it is an old adage. And it's in politics, it's where you stand depends upon where you sit.
And I just used that last week, Lee.
Yeah, good. Well, they very, very well. It's, like I said, it's a very common expression, apparently. And so I think there is a lot of truth to the fact that we've seen a little politics get into our political life lately, a little partisan politics. And, I think as we look toward the midterm elections, the stakes are sky high here. We have a very, very narrow difference in the majority and minority parties, the Republicans having just a single digit edge. And because the traditional numbers very often are almost all the time coming against the incumbent party, if the president is unpopular, or even if the president is popular, you tend to lose seats, and almost without exception. And so the expectation has been that the Republicans, all things being equal, are about to lose the House in the midterm elections and maybe even the Senate if it was a tidal wave. Of course, now with these court decisions, all things are not equal. And we're seeing clearly the court involved in the politics of this all, even though Chief Justice Roberts will frequently comment that the justices are not being political in their decision making, but it's hard to see that that is not the case right now. And in fact, we're seeing the notion that not only is it being political, but the timing of all this. There have been court cases. I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to play one in class, but the Purcell ruling in 2006 basically said, when it comes to elections, if you're close to an election, you probably, as the court, you shouldn't dip into it because it creates confusion in voters, and that's not a good thing. And what we're seeing right now is exactly that. They're moving primary dates because the changes are so close to when primaries are being held that it's almost mechanically impossible.
They allowed Louisiana to stop an election where voting was in process.
Right.
Or already in process, yeah. So we're seeing a real case of the politics really entering into these midterm elections, and the court, who only recently, relatively recently, decided that it was okay to make a Supreme Court judge appointment. The Senate did this at the end of a presidential term, and also decided that when the Democrats tried to do that, that was not seen as being okay because it was too close. Now we're seeing that the clock is, not so important after all when it comes to the redistricting issue.
Yeah, I think it's completely unrealistic to say that politics is out of the process. I mean, that statistic, Jay, that you noted earlier from NBC News, that there's overwhelming support for removing politicians from the process. As Lee just said, politics permeates everything these days. So an independent commission is almost laughable at this point because everyone has some type of political view that they are going to have influence in that process.
I'm just curious, moving past this and where people support this, what does this say about people, or what does this do to Americans' kind of faith in democracy? Because the partisanship has been growing. We've been in very partisan times in history before. So this is, it's not like this is, oh my gosh, we've never seen this before. But in modern politics, and really in our lifetimes, it has not been like this. This seems to be one of those things, like stopping an election underway so that you can have a party redistrict the seat away. That seems like a real kind of crossing a line that really would serve to undermine Americans' faith in democracy. Am I being hyperbolic?
Well, the Democrats would argue that not only is democracy at stake in this midterm elections, but this redistricting and the court getting involved, the Supreme Court, sort of proves their point. That's what they would argue. So they're hoping that this all in districts where efforts are clearly made to put in more Republicans and knock out Democrats who are Black, minority, people of color, that this is what the game's all about, and that they're in fact proving their point. The question is, does it create some kind of backlash? It may to some extent, but some of these districts that they're changing, they're really changing them. And the expectation is that Democrats are going to have to win the House by even a larger margin than they normally need to do to carry seats because of the way the population is distributed in red and blue states, meaning that the Democrats are probably going to have to carry the midterm elections by around 4 or 5 points, if this is the case, to then have any kind of chance to actually flip the House. And that's a tall order. I mean, that's a 4 or 5 point nationally is something we don't see often in any of our elections. So that's what's at stake here. And, the Republicans obviously are in the position of power in the White House, in the House, in the Senate, and the Supreme Court, and they are not being shy in exercising that power.
So what are the odds, Mary, you think, of if the Democrats were to gain control of any of these branches of government, of them saying, you know what, we want to follow the will of the majority and we want to institute independent commissions? Or is it just as likely they'll do exactly what Republicans are doing in this case, which is come hell or high water, they want to be able to stay in power?
I think, as Lee points out, it's the game. I think they're going to follow suit. They're going to counter with an attack. And I think it's really sending a message that democracy is not an institution, it's self-serving. So there is no reverence any longer for democracy in terms of a process that we follow. We follow the rules. It's now becoming that we're adjusting the rules to our benefit, regardless of the side.
We are seeing some efforts among some Democrat groups to protest this. They're asking about athletes perhaps to withdraw commitments to athletic programs in some of these states that are doing that. I'm not sure how that goes. That may be a one-day story. The notion of organizing to affect and influence some of these decisions and to sort of mute the effect of them, I think is an interesting idea. I'm not sure it's going to have the effect. I think what's going to happen is that this is going to make it a little bit harder for the Democrats to take control.
So, Lee, question for you. What is the one gift that you often personally give to all of our Marist Poll graduating seniors at our end-of-year party?
Yeah, so I typically say that when they came to Marist, they were promised that they would have a chance of high earning potential upon their graduation and the rest of their lives. And I want to make it a reality just when they finish their 4 years at Marist, in that I give out each of the graduating seniors who work in the poll, not the entire senior class, obviously, a lot of tickets, something, a scratch off, as they are referred to, usually $1 or $2 per. And I always put the caveat that if someone wins big, we have to talk about the Marist Fund or the Mirangov Fund or some fund that's not just the student winning a big. Well, that hasn't happened.
I was going to guess that hadn't happened.
Yet.
I'm here, right? It hasn't happened.
All right. Well, Lee, your lottery purchase is far from the only one. In 2024, Americans spent nearly almost $105 billion on lottery tickets. That's nearly twice the amount spent in 2008. And growth has been consistent. The scratch-off ticket, as you've purchased, is, of course, the most common, but there are the big games like Powerball and Mega Millions. And the average wager is a total of about $120 annually, with some heavier players upping that average to more than $1,000. So for most, it's just a small part of their lives and of their routine and habit. But here's the thing. The lottery is actually a huge revenue stream for the states. The states collect the difference between what players spend and what they win. So those proceeds in total, tens of billions of dollars, and they go toward education, infrastructure, and other public services. So in other words, it's simultaneously one of the country's most popular forms of entertainment and one of the least examined public finance mechanisms. So let's break down that figure, that $104.7 billion on lottery tickets spent in 2024. What do you think, Lee, is driving that growth? Do you think it has anything to do with contributing to the public benefit?
Well, I think that's always been a very effective public relations vehicle, because if you dip in a little, you say, well, I'm helping out education in the state, and yeah, it's sure some of these states do use, it's not a huge, but it's a significant impact on the budget, significant slice of the pie. I think most people, look, I think there's two different kinds of players in all this. One is the folks who they stop at the gas station, they buy a scratch off or two for a couple bucks, and they have a chance of winning, at least breaking even, or maybe winning $10 or $20 on that. And then there's the folks who are playing the ones you get the news on, the multi-billion dollar winners who are doing this and really are saying, I'm going to play this. This is part of what I do. This is not just a fluke decision. This is part of my culture. It's a habit forming thing. I should point out that I myself am not hesitant to do this. And I do have, as you know, you're not surprised by the fact that I happen to have a few power play tickets, and then I have a mega. I find this, which costs $7 when I do it between the two of them, a very bad investment. Not only have I not won big, I haven't really won small either. And so I spent $7 on these two, and the most I've ever won is $8, which I immediately reinvested, of course, and then proceeded to not win that. So I'm in this one. Notice I was covering the numbers because I don't want to affect, although the drawing will occur after this airs. So I was being doubly certain about that. But I find that the numbers, you don't even get a few of the numbers. I really think it's, for me anyway, it has not been in any way financially beneficial. Neither has it for the students who I was giving these tickets to. So good for education, good for infrastructure, not so good for my wallet, I guess.
Jay, there's this interesting description of the lottery as both entertainment, but it's also gambling. So when we think about this as a revenue builder, because as we know, gambling can be addictive, is there some sort of conflict of interest in some way to the public good by using these funds for public works?
Well, that was the argument early on. Remember, the lottery's a fairly new thing in America. Yeah. When I was a kid, there was, I think there was only 2 or 3 states that had lotteries, and there's still 5 states that don't. And there was that argument that that the lottery is the state funding a tax on people who can't, basically taking money from people who can't afford it by feeding a gambling habit, and then, as Lee said, oh yes, and we're going to spend it on education or things like that. And boy, that's great, except that you're taxing the people who are least able to afford it to pay for education. Aren't there more equitable ways to do that? But the counter-argument to that was that what was there before lotteries? The numbers guy on the corner, right? It was the mob. So, are you taking away money from organized crime? Yes. Are you funding schools with taxes on people who are least able to afford it? Yes. Are both of those things true at the same time? Yes. And then you make that value judgment. And all but 5 states, I think, have made the value judgment that people are going to gamble, so we might as well have it regulated and have it benefit somebody. The House always wins. In this case, the House is the state, and sure, so it's funding education or funding whatever. It's complicated, but human nature is human nature.
So I'm going to share an anecdote here. Every Christmas, my mom buys a scratch-off for every guest at Christmas dinner. And we probably have 20, 25 family members at the house on Christmas. And I am convinced that if my mom did not purchase said scratch-off tickets, that a lot of people would not come. In fact, my cousin, one cousin one year.
I thought the food is really awesome.
Wow. It is really awesome. I mean, this is just, but I have a cousin who was sick one Christmas and asked his mom when they went home, did you bring me Anna Lane's lottery ticket or scratch off ticket? So, I mean, this is like a thing. But in that sense, it's more of a game and it's not necessarily gambling. Do you think that scratch offs is the most basic form of the lottery should be distinguished from larger, bigger ticket games that are played like Mega Millions and Powerball?
Yeah, I think it's a different sport, as it were. And I think that with the big, with gambling itself, it's kind of like when you see a commercial for some healthcare product. They tell you what it does, and in the fine print, it says this may also cause, and they list the 14 diseases that you probably don't want any of. And so I think this is, the same kind of thing where you are encouraged. If you're not in it, you can't win it. And then in the fine print, it says, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800 blah, 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 gambler. And I think that's what's going on here as well, because it's an attraction. It's fun. You always hold out the chance that you'll be just like that person who's got their picture in the paper, even though they say that people who win the lotto, the big money, very often squander it. I'd like to have the chance.
You want the opportunity to squander it. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. And, I've never really calculated what I was going to do with all that money.
You haven't?
But you hear no, I have not.
I have.
Oh, I have. Yeah. Especially when it gets into those hundreds of millions or whatever those giant ones. I got plans.
Yeah, I think in that case, I'd be going to HR and putting in some new position requests as you guys head out the door.
Hi, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting, though, that because we talked about how the lottery is actually relatively new, but since lotteries have been introduced in states, and this isn't cause and effect, but look at what gambling has become in America. Everything from casinos in lots of states. It used to be only New Jersey and Nevada. But then these prediction markets, which are some people claim are finance. I will say right out front, I think it's gambling. If you're betting on the odds of of a thunderstorm hitting London next week, that's gambling. That's not what prediction market, what's financial in that. I think gambling has become so ubiquitous and widespread and kind of ingrained in not just American society, because there's lots of cultures that have lots of gambling in it, that the lottery is almost kind of like, oh yeah, the lottery. It's almost like, oh, I forgot about that, because it's in so many other places.
And Lee, I would bet you that there are lots of people heading out for Memorial Day weekend on vacation and will stop off at the gas station and buy a lottery ticket.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that sort of leads us in very, very thankfully into our fun fact. A question I was asked of the Associated Press in 1986. The question of what type of vacation are you planning this summer? And this was a national audience, and there's subpopulations of the people who were planning on taking a vacation in the summer. And the number one was sightseeing, followed at 33%, followed by visiting relatives at 27%, the beach at 26%, visiting friends at 11%, and other things, the mountains at 7%, and people had other responses scattered around on that as well. I would be in the visiting friends category. I think this is a good time to, sort of spend some time you can't do during the year because things are moving a little too quickly. So I'd be in the 11%. But how about you folks?
Mary, ladies first.
I always like to play that card, Jay.
do, yeah.
Well, these days I would probably say, where's the baseball stadium? Because my family and I like to go to different baseball stadiums on vacation over the summer. But in 1986, I was just a wee lass. So let's just be very clear about that. And my mom actually did not like to fly. So we took a lot of car trips, and our annual summer vacations were often to the mountains in Pennsylvania, in the Poconos. So I was in that 7%.
You were in the 7%. So together we're at 18%, and we still don't tip it. Jay, are you in the small numbers and going to put us over some of the big ones?
Okay, so first I would say beach, because I love the beach.
There you go.
But second, I'm going to put on Barb's hat here and say, what is with the design of this survey? These are not mutually exclusive. You can visit friends at the beach. You can spend time with family in the mountains. I don't understand these choices. I know it's a fun fact. I'm not trying to, rain down on our fun fact, but this one doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because it's how are you going to spend your summer vacation? Well, there's geography, and then there's how you're spending it, with people. Those are two different things. I don't know. I don't think it's the.
You might even be doing some sightseeing as you drive past the mountain on the way to the beach.
Right. You could do
with your friends and relatives.
Beach with friends and relatives and friends.
So
that's it.
Yeah. So we need an all of the above or more than one of the above in all this. Well, regardless, I hope everybody does get a chance to do one of these things or all of them, as you would both indicate anyway. And that is where we're going to leave it today. And we'll catch up with you next week. Have a great week, and enjoy the weekend.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers, Cassie Connors, Sylvia Weiser, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.